Hello, everybody out there. Today we're talking in English because I'm talking to the fabulous Benebell Wen, who speaks English, and Mandarin, which I don't, so we have to speak English. Hello, Benebell.
Hi, Kirsten. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, I'm very, very happy that you are here and that you came up with the idea to talk on such short notice with me. So I had the pleasure to prepare myself today. And for everybody out there who doesn't know Benebell, I'm quite sure many people of you know her. I just say a few words about Benebell, what I've noted down. And you can correct me, Benebell, if I'm wrong. So Benebell is a full-time lawyer. Apart from being an author, I think you'll not only write about tarot, but also about other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Benebell is having a big, has a huge blog with loads of information. She works how many hours a day as a tarot reader? Many hours, I think. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. Benebell says she is a content creator and not a teacher, which I find very interesting. We need to talk about that actually, and that she is religious, not spiritual. So I'm wondering how you define spirituality, Benebell. Benebell has loads of free courses out on her blog. She's very generous with sharing her material. She has many postings on Facebook, on Instagram. She has a very good YouTube channel. She's prolific in tarot and astrology, in numerology, in magic, in I Ching. Did I miss out on something here?
Not at all. You got everything. Thank you.
And well, since I have said all this, the first question from one of the viewers actually is, how do you manage this?
How do I manage this? Well, I think there's many answers to the question, but I think the best answer would be it's something instilled in me since I was very, very small. So from a very young age, my parents have always been very, very Spartan, where, you know, that very, you have to do very disciplined, very military background. And so because of that military background that they applied to parenting, I grew up with this sense of being very regimented and strict with my own schedule, being very disciplined, orderly. And that does kind of help in terms of establishing my schedule as an adult.
And if you say full-time lawyer, how long are working hours in America actually? Because I don't know this.
It depends on what type of law you do. I don't do private practice. I'm in-house counsel. In-house counsel means there's a large company, like a very big corporation. They do many different areas of business. And then, of course, you need to have a lawyer inside your company to help you with like managing contracts, telling you, yes, you can do this. No, you can't do that. So that's my job. My job is the lawyer inside a large company telling people, no, do not do that. Yes, do that. You know, so that's my whole job.
Okay, so you're working in-house, you don't have to go anywhere, so it gives you the time to do tarot in between actually.
Correct. So it's 10 a.m. So my working hours is 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Well, at least before the pandemic, you know, before the pandemic, it was 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are in very strange times, and it's been a very different schedule for 2-3 months. So I forgot what real life is like.
So actually it's 40 hours plus all the stuff you do with tarot. So yeah, I'm really impressed, and I still can't understand how you find the energy to do this, because yeah, it's I couldn't do this. I mean, I do a lot, but you're always online whenever I ask you a question, for example, and you keep on producing such high quality stuff. Where I'm really impressed.
I think one of the interesting things is ever since mobile phones became a thing, it does feel like if you're a working individual, you are always online because it's on your phone, and so that's good and bad. The bad is that you're never unplugged. The good is you are a lot more accessible because, every time someone contacts you, there's a ping. So
Yeah. Okay. I will bring the word to people who are not as busy as you are, and perhaps they learn from this. So you're living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I heard that astrology is quite big there, and you a few minutes ago said it's a kind of a hippie area, if I quote you right. So is there a big scene for tarot and other stuff like astrology, oracle near where you live?
I would say yes, definitely. Like every other part of the world right now, so much of it is online. So there's really more of a social network in terms of the community, but definitely in the physical Bay Area, you have a lot of tarot authors in this area. You have there was that huge, BATS, the Bay Area Tarot Symposium. There was a huge tarot conference that happened here for, I think, at least a decade. And so, yeah, there's a very rich heritage of the metaphysical arts and the New Age here in the Northern California region, for sure.
And do you know when about this started?
Well, way before me, I think it's intertwined. I think with paganism, you had Dianic Wicca, you had a couple of other pagan traditions that were really rich here in the Northern California area. That ties a little bit into tarot, I think maybe. I think there's a huge lawsuit I remember with Z Budapest that kind of involved tarot, not tarot exactly. It was more about whether or not you could have a tarot business, whether or not it was challenging the anti-fortune telling laws here in Northern California, which obviously involves tarot reading professionally. And that happened in the Northern California area and became a landmark case for many other regions of the country.
Okay. We said that we would like to talk about what's happening in the tarot scene right now, because I think you're one of the persons who stands out for this tarot scene, but also know this scene quite well. So what would you say is what does the tarot scene of America make out in comparison, for example, to the British tarot scene, which is quite huge as well?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the tarot is that it's kind of like a chameleon, right? Where it takes on the stripes and patterns of wherever it goes. And so because of that, on a nuanced scale, what American tarot traditions or the culture, would look like is going to be a little bit different from the British scene, and even how tarot looks and plays out in Chinese diasporas and Chinese communities. So in the United States, I think people don't want to acknowledge it. So here's the thing. I think people want to deny it, but the reality maybe is that it's tied a lot to politics. And we will say, I think if you ask them, no, it's not tied to politics, but I think it is more than we want to admit, because you see people making like, oh, I will support this artist because this artist has this political leaning, or I will not support this deck creator because of their politics. Social justice is very much the lens that we want to look at tarot through. So we judge tarot and oracle decks through the lens of social politics. And I see that being a lot more prevalent now in the 21st century than I've seen maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. How do I have to imagine this? I'm just imagining a tarot reader through a political lens, if I understood you right.
I can give one example very recently that I happened to notice was, I think there was a tarot deck creator who talked about the pandemic and that creator's personal political opinions on what's going on, right? They had a very firm, like a specific belief system. And
Mhm.
then you had conversations on the internet come up. Should we support this deck creator? Should we still buy this deck creator's decks, or should we not buy this deck creator's decks? Should we cancel this deck creator? All not because of the tarot, not because of what they're doing in the tarot community, but because of something they said about their political view. And I think that's a really interesting phenomenon I see more prevalent today than I did several decades back.
Yeah, I would say we don't have this here in Germany. There are not so many tarot creators, I would say. Plus, we don't have such a huge internet community as you have, from what I um, see in the US. By the way, what do you know about the European community of tarot?
Okay, so it's all stereotype. That's the first thing. You know, they're going to be,
Probably
it's going to
okay.
it's going to be the American perspective, the stereotype of, it's actually a positive one, though it's a positive stereotype. And when I have interacted with European tarot readers, here's the thing, most of them are in tarot associations. They're very, very serious about tarot. So I think that is going to color my view. It's not your typical street level tarot fortune teller. It's somebody who is pretty serious about the craft. When I went to the tarot conference in London, they seem a lot more serious about the tarot. They seem to have a little bit more, my perspective is that they have a lot more respect and veneration for the tradition and the history and the precedent that came before them. And then you decide on an individual level whether you want to follow and honor those traditions or you go your own path, for sure. But I don't think there is any denial or rejection of that history and legacy. That's my perspective.
And in America, you would say there's not so much stress on the history?
I don't see it anymore. If you're talking about your average tarot reader in 2020, there's a very strong sentiment I don't think you can deny. There's this idea of throw out all the books. You know, Waite was a terrible person. Crowley was a terrible person. McGregor Mathers was horrible. Golden Dawn, forget about them. Just do whatever you want to do. Like, I feel like obviously there will be exceptions to the rule, and there's a lot of exceptions to the rule, obviously, and that's why the traditions continue. But I do see a stronger surge of that voice where you're more anarchical and individualistic, where I just want to have my own personal, unique connection with the tarot and with the divinities and not care about how traditions before me had done it. That's what I see more prevalently today.
Would you link this to a certain age? Because I would say what we call here the Generation Y has something of this attitude.
I do think so. Yeah, I think the segment of the wider tarot community in the United States that I think I would be more in touch with, that I see, that I actually have direct observation with on the front lines, would be the younger generation. I'm talking ages 18 to 29, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that age group of people coming up, wanting to learn tarot. So for example, when I was 19 years old, my concept of studying the tarot was to pull out all of those big books off the bookshelves, learn what they were doing, learn from tarot readers who are 40, 50, 60 years old and hear what they have to say, and kind of use that to inform my own understanding of the tarot. Today, I do really observe a rejection of that. I see a rejection of older books. I don't understand the language from the 1900s, so I'm not even going to read it. And also a rejection of how people before them did it. And an interesting sort of parallel trend is that you actually see a lot of professional tarot readers not use the tarot. They actually use oracle decks, right? So I see a lot of people doing paid client readings exclusively with oracle decks and no longer using the tarot. But then the marketing, like how they still advertise themselves as tarot readers. And I thought that was a really interesting new development that I had not seen 20 years ago.
I also I talked a bit last year about what I perceive from the Americans, which we could use in Germany. Which one thing was the networking, which of course has pros and cons, but which I find is really nice in America. Also, there are so many bloggers out there and people like you sharing their material. We don't have this so much from knowledgeable sources in Germany, I would say, as we have it from American sources. But also, no, I forgot what I wanted to say. Yeah, that I think people in America go more and more away from this psychological attitude to tarot, more to a psychic view of tarot. Is this right? Would you say this? Because we here in Germany are very much stressing the psychology of tarot, and that it's, of course, we do prognosis, but perhaps not so much. It's better to do it psychologically, whatever this is. And I think it's different in America.
I think there's a wider commentary about that. The pendulum swings back and forth throughout, tarot history, and I've seen that. So I think if you talk 20 years ago, there was more of a tarot and psychology trend and interest, even here in the United States, really trying to find psychological explanations for tarot phenomenon. Today, you're correct. I don't see that as much. In the very, very recent past, there has been more of a separation between psychological concepts and tarot as a psychic phenomenon, tarot as a form of witchcraft. But then I think the pendulum swings back and forth throughout the cycles of history, because you've seen the tarot is witchcraft, tarot is something psychic in the past too. So I think right now we're just in a different part of the pendulum swing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm just seeing people commenting. They're all very happy that you're talking to us.
I'm happy to be talking to you guys. Don't be mad at what I'm saying. I'm just, I'm like vomiting words out of my mouth early in the morning.
Actually, Rose, oh, I need my glasses. Rose or Rosa is saying that you yourself have created a lovely tarot deck, the Spirit Keeper, right? Spirit Tarot. I actually bought the mini tarot with the, I think when I got your metaphysics planner.
Yeah, the mini one, cute. Uh-huh.
So I'm still wanting to do this, but I'm not very good with handiwork. I'm very At one point, I will do the mini tarot. Yeah, and Benebell is not only, I forgot to say this, she's not great at tarot and astrology, but she's also an excellent painter. I mean, it's really so amazing what you do, but I don't want to start with this now again. I need to come back to my questions. You said actually that there's a big Chinese tarot scene, and I didn't imagine this at all, because I thought tarot has nothing to do with the Chinese tradition. But in fact, there are many Chinese people doing tarot. Also in China.
I don't think it per se, I wouldn't say it's part of the Chinese tradition. I think it's more something imported, right? Like, I think it's something imported into the East Asian regions, and they're like, oh, this is really cool. And then they adapt it and they integrate it into what they've always been doing. So that's what I was talking about. I don't think like tarot kind of was born in China or anything like that. It's more imported into the culture and then integrated into the pre-existing culture. Like in terms of social network, you know how you can look on Instagram with hashtag tarot of Instagram, tarot readers, things like that. You can do Chinese language hashtags and you can really see what they're doing. There are different video content platforms in China that I look at, and it's actually exactly the same, but just in Chinese. They have tarot deck reviews, they have unboxings. Within the community, they have interesting, robust debates, whether to read with reversals. They debate about superstitions. Do you have to buy your first tarot? So it's actually exactly the same. It's just as robust as it is in the English language communities, but it's all in Chinese. So there's for sure tarot has been integrated into the New Age metaphysical communities in China and Taiwan.
Interesting. And how do you link yourself, your Taiwanese tradition with the tarot tradition?
One of the interesting things I saw is like if you do hashtag Talopai, which is tarot in Chinese, you actually pull up a lot of photographs of tarot with Buddhist and Taoist ceremonial magic traditions, or they link the tarot with the hexagrams and the I Ching. So I think that's really interesting and goes back to what I was saying earlier. The tarot really is great at integrating itself with whichever culture it touches, right? So when tarot touches the Chinese culture, it's really going to seep into what was already there and create something beautiful, new, some kind of a fusion. And you do see that. Politics is really big in the United States right now. So when tarot touches that American culture in the 21st century, it takes on those characteristics, right? And so in the Chinese culture right now, I think they are seeing it through the lens of witchcraft, through the lens of Taoist magic, and you really do see them use it to communicate with Buddhist divinities or Buddhist concepts of mythology. It's very, very interesting.
Is there a Buddhist tarot out there?
I actually think the only Buddhist tarot I know of is the one by Robert Place. I think Robert Place.
I know Robert Place. I didn't know he did a Buddhist tarot. Interesting.
I think he did. Don't quote me on that. Somebody can correct me and fact check that. But I think he did a Buddhist tarot deck, which I thought was really beautiful. There are a couple of others. I don't think they're as big. I see more just the classic Rider-Waite-Smith or the Thoth tarot, that deck integrated into Taoist magic is what I see.
Back to the tradition again. Is it usual that people in America, readers in America, always use, when they work with the weight deck, the 8 as strength and the 11 as justice?
Yeah, I think that's the most popular tarot deck that I see. That's the one with the 8 as strength, 11 as justice, the weight deck, or weight-based inspired tarot decks for sure. What is interesting is very, very recently, I've seen a slight surge in return in terms of interest in the Thoth. So I know not 5 years ago, I did not see as many people interested in Crowley's Thoth deck. Today I see more Crowley-Harris Thoth decks being featured. So that's an interesting turn.
Yeah, I don't think you understood my question.
Oh.
Perhaps because you're not aware of the dilemma.
Oh.
Here in Germany, we have a huge discussion about the 8 and the 11 in the major arcana. And everybody who uses a weight deck usually learns that it's wrong to say that 8 is strength, but it's supposed to be justice, because on the Tarot de Marseille, it's justice as well. And if you have a book, even though it says 8 on the card strength, that you will find it at 11.
Oh, no, I did not know that there was that controversy. Waite made the whole change. He wanted to rectify the tarot. His whole idea was, I'm doing something special and revolutionary and groundbreaking, and so I'm going to rectify all the bad things about the tarot. So that was his perspective, right? And so he switched 8 and 11 so that when you look at Aries, Taurus, Gemini, when you go down the zodiac, it will flow more in sequence with the zodiac. And there's a couple of other reasons that he said. I get into it in the Book of Maps for my Spirit Keepers Tarot deck, my theory on the 8-11 switch. So I really talk about that more in depth from a magical perspective. I created a guidebook to the Spirit Keepers Tarot. So the Spirit Keepers Tarot, my sort of where I was coming from, my personal gnosis was that it's a deck that is a synthesis of Crowley and Waite's 2 decks, right? And so if you're going to bring together and merge those 2 really different systems, you have to confront the question of, is 8, the strength lust card, or is it the justice card, right? And so I had to really grapple with that question. And I talked about why I went with Waite's instead of Crowley's or the Marseille tradition. And I think there's also a lot of other historic decks where the numbers are kind of, like for example, if you think about Atea, we talk about the Atea decks as tarot, but that's a completely different numbering system for the 78 cards, right? And then my recent obsession, as I was talking to you about, the Montaigne Tarot from 1460 something, it's referred to as a tarot deck, but it's only 50 cards. The Solabusca Tarot as well, the Minchiati. So I think if you really look at the broader scope, these numberings and what card is what has always been kind of fluid.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, of course, it's always a mix up with the numbers. I was just wondering how Americans think about this dilemma, and obviously they don't think much about it. They just...
No.
Okay.
I think tarot scholars, people who are really, really interested in the craft of tarot, will think about this question. Mm-hmm. But your average tarot reader who's slinging cards on the internet, I don't think they think about it.
So now we see how the Europeans are very serious about this and really think about this a lot. You could have huge discussions about this in Germany. I think you could fill a congress with this question.
Wow. I want to be part of that congress. Now I want to go to Germany just to have that conversation.
Yes, I really want you to come to Germany as well. But
make it happen. Manifest.
We will talk about this at another time. I'm already said to Mary that I really want her to come to Germany, but it's all a thing about money and stuff. Right now we do it here, and later we see whether we can meet up in person, which I would be delighted to do. Well, I mixed up my questions here. Basically, these are most of the questions I wanted to ask you about this. Now, we wanted to talk about the Renaissance.
Okay.
You already mentioned some decks from the Renaissance, and just a few days ago you posted something on the Mentega deck from 1455, I think. And you seem to be very into the Renaissance, and I was wondering why a progressive American girl would like to look at Renaissance cards, and what does it say about tarot today?
Wow. Well, I don't know if it says anything about tarot today. I don't think it's really part of the present day zeitgeist. I think that's really something more of my own interest. If anything, it's antithetical to the present day zeitgeist in the United States. You have this whole movement of modernizing the tarot, making it more modern, making it more reflective of today's society and culture, and repudiating a lot of the antiquated constructs that were embedded into the tarot. So it's antithetical to what's actually going on in the world. But I just think ever since I started conceiving of the Spirit Keepers Tarot, if you look at the Spirit Keepers Tarot deck itself, a lot of the symbolism, symbology, a lot of the inspiration for it comes from the Renaissance, comes from ideas in the Renaissance. I think for me, I don't actually know why I'm so interested in it. I'm interested in how students learned, for example, the quadrivium and the trivium. Like, what would somebody who's 19, 20 years old, what would they study? How do they look at the world? Everything in terms of that, like that period right before the Enlightenment era has just been my new fascination. I'm not sure why. I can't answer your question.
Yeah, but I think my personal opinion is that the times we're living in have a lot to do with the Renaissance. For example, the conflicts, but also the productive exchange between East and Western worlds. I'm thinking here of Europe and the Arabian world, basically, Persia, whatever, all the stuff which came over in the Renaissance, and kind of rekindled European thinking during the Renaissance. And now we have again this exchange. We also have now, which wasn't happening in the Renaissance, the exchange between America and Europe. This is something new as well. And I just was wondering whether we can relate these past times where tarot obviously was invented or surfaced with our times. Whether you had any thoughts on that?
I think if you actually read a lot of the texts from the Renaissance period, it's remarkably more multicultural than we realize. They write about Hinduism and Buddhism. They write about what's going on in China, Cathay at the time. They talk about what's going on in India. They're very interested in Mamluk culture as well. The period, I think, was the 13th, 14th century when the Mamluk Egyptian Sultanate ruled a huge swath of the Middle East. And so, and then the Templars, the Crusades went into that area during the Crusades. And so there was a lot of that mixing and exchange of culture. Then when they came back west, they brought a lot of that thought back. And so there's more multiculturalism during the Renaissance than we really acknowledge. And I see that now we have a much more multicultural perspective of the tarot as well. So I think in that sense, there's a parallel. We do have a new surge or some kind of a renaissance going on right now when it comes to progressive spirituality.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I joined the Tarot Association about 15, 16 years ago, we were always discussing how the tarot of the future would look like. I think we were thinking about 15 years later, which is now. Do you have any opinion where tarot is heading?
Wow, that's a very big question. I think anybody who has been really immersed in the study and craft of tarot for over 20 years today, right? If you've been interested in this for more than 20 years today, and you see the direction that the tarot as a large, massive body is going, there's a lot that I think the older generation criticizes, right? I mean, there's a lot you can say about it that isn't always positive. I would never want to stop the direction of where tarot is going. I would never want to be any part of that. I think it should be an organic flow based on exactly what the dominant mentality, the democratic ideas that are circulating. So I don't want to be in the path of where tarot is going. But I think if it keeps on going in this direction, it's going to be a lot harder in the future, far future, to trace back the roots of tarot. I'm trying to understand some of the precedent, the tradition, because, for example, I see a lot of young tarot readers who don't know the distinctions between the Rider-Waite-Smith, the Marseille, the Thoth. You know, they don't have a lot of knowledge that was taken for granted just 20 years ago. So I think the trend is toward more quote unquote intuitive reading, where you I think what it is, sorry to be rambling at you, but I think the culture is going more toward instant gratification. Today, we have an expectation of instant gratification. And so you see that in the tarot as well. People who are learning tarot today want instant gratification. They want to be a tarot master tomorrow. So I'm a beginner today, tomorrow I'm a tarot master, in 3 days I'm going to be doing professional tarot readings. You really see that perspective today. Whereas my perspective is I didn't see that 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. I saw people saying, you need to study this, you need to know this. This is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, a checklist of things you need to know before you can even claim you are proficient at the tarot. Whereas that just is non-existent today.
Yeah, which is not good either. I think a good mixture of tradition and creativity would be the thing. But I think so too. I wonder whether tarot is going to be a kind of game you play in the saloons, like you did tarot reading, tarot play before you started to use it as an occult tool. So whether it's going to, whether we are losing the art of good tarot readings.
So my perspective is I don't think we're losing it, because I think this is part of the occult's innate, inherent gatekeeping. I'm not saying us humans as gatekeepers. I'm saying the occult as a concept gatekeeps itself. You know, so the occult will always be hidden in plain sight. It's nothing we need to do or try or attempt. And so I think because of that, even far into the future, people who are intended to mine deeply into the occult are still going to unravel these aspects in the heritage of tarot. But in terms of the mainstream, yeah, that's always going to, I think it'll always be elusive to the mainstream.
Yeah. So I'm just reading, Marion is saying that in all the interviews I have been doing with people, it always comes up that people don't want to learn anything anymore. And it's difficult. It's a really difficult thing, which brings me to what Rose is saying, that you are such a wonderful teacher, and she wants to say again how much she appreciates this. And then I remember that you say you are not a teacher. So what is a content? What did you say? A content provider? Content creator. Sorry. Oh, my battery is running out. Just for a second. Sorry.
No problem.
Back. My God.
Well, I think content creator is factual. Like, I literally create content and I put it out there. So there's no disputing that I'm a content creator, right? Like, it's a factual description of what I do. With teacher, I think the title of teacher should be venerated and should be honored and should not be thrown around. And unless you truly are acting as a teacher, you should not own that title, right? And so I would never want to claim that title unless what I was doing was actually teaching. To teach, I need to have a very one-on-one interpersonal connection with you, right? I need to talk to you. I need to look at what you're doing and then build a pedagogical process around you as a unique individual. I can't say ABC and expect everybody to fit into that box. With content creation, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just saying something black and white, and then it either fits you or it doesn't fit you, and then you need to figure out what to do with that information. So I haven't taught you anything in that sense. You need to be very discerning of what to accept, what not to accept. A teacher is somebody who has a very astute observation of you. They know who you are, and they can create content or adjust the content in a very flexible way to make sure they optimize your learning and your progress. I can't do that on a one-on-one basis with everybody, so I'm not a teacher.
That sounds to me very much like a Kill Bill attitude. Very, very Eastern approach for teaching, I have to say.
Maybe.
So yeah, interesting. I never thought about this because you're right. So many people tell me too. I say I teach tarot, but it's probably much nicer than, like Rose is saying, you are a great teacher, than calling yourself a teacher. I have to think about this. And what is your difference between religion and spirituality, if I may ask? Because I would never say I'm religious at all. But now I'm just tell me how you define religion and spirituality, please.
Well, when I say religion, I don't mean an institutionalized religion. So I wouldn't say my quote unquote religion fits into any of the pre-existing boxes. The reason I use the word religion is because it's based, I do a lot of ritual. There's a lot of things I do. My actions are based on things that are irrational, intuitive, emotional, and completely cannot be proven in any scientific way. But I act in very important ways based on things that are completely not rational. So for me, that's religion. That's a religious concept. Spirituality is also the same thing, but here's the thing with spirituality. When I think of the word spirituality, I think my objective is to in some way transcend my physical body, to be better than the physical, the base, the shadow, the beast inside of all of us. We all have an inner beast, right? And so to me, spirituality, in my perspective, is about eliminating the inner beast, eliminating the inner drive, and not being as connected to the physical world, and being more connected to something heady, like, something very above the crown chakra. And that is spirituality. And a lot of people follow that path. For me, I'm very fascinated by the integration of the materialistic and the body with concepts of religion. So that's why I don't see myself as spiritual, because I don't want to be virtuous. I don't want to be this high, I'm very happy being honest with my own gossipy nature, my own complainy, whiny, mean-spirited, saying, like, that's who I am right now. I have not evolved beyond that. So to pretend I'm anything more than that is also doing myself a disservice. So I embrace the fact that I'm kind of an asshole,
Oh, no, I don't think so. Yeah, what you're saying, I would describe this difference between being a magician or a hermit, basically. So for me, it would be more the magic path or the mystical path. Yeah, but I think I can relate to this very well. I just wouldn't use these terms you were saying.
Yeah.
Just somebody else saying something. Sorry, out there, I need to use my glasses now. I can't read anymore. Apama is asking, how does one consider whether it's okay to be a professional reader, to do paid readings, versus focusing on the intuitive aspect of reading to help others as a service?
So my go-to answer to that has always been, when you can find the path of light in a tarot reading for a client. So if we're doing a tarot reading, and doesn't matter what cards come up, whatever cards come up for your tarot reading, no matter what your question is, any question whatsoever, ethical, unethical, any question, if I can use the cards to find a path of light for you, then you're ready to be a tarot reader professionally.
Okay. I think she's asking whether, I don't know whether I got this right, whether we are allowed to take money for what we're doing. Is this?
Oh.
No, I was just wondering whether she's asking this or not. You probably understood it better than me.
No. Well, should you monetize tarot reading? I think that's an individual decision. I don't think that's something I can say, everybody should or everybody should not, or this is right or this is wrong. I think that's so individual. You as an individual person has to make this decision, an ethical conclusion, whether or not monetizing tarot and making it into a business, if that's okay or not okay. It has to be an individual decision.
Yeah, my opinion on this is that at least I paid a lot for my education, and it didn't come over me by spirit. And I need to have a living, so I take money for what I do, because everybody gets paid for what they do. Usually, yeah. That's my attitude to it. And I don't think it's a gift, basically, what we're doing as a tarot reader from whatever, but it's something everybody can do, and they need to put an effort into it to be doing it. So yeah.
It's both. I mean, think about a musician. If you talk about a concert musician, you have to pay $100 for a ticket to go to a symphony, right? And I would say, like, music is to an extent a gift. Like, some people will just never be taught, like, it is to a certain extent a gift, a divine gift. But the divine gift is never enough. I mean, the person that you are seeing on stage playing the violin so beautifully, the amount of, like, they talk, like the joke, we always say the joke is 10,000 hours or 40 hours per day, because there's only 24 hours in a day. So a musician has to practice the violin 40 hours a day, right? And the joke is that because you really need to craft you really have to hone your craft. So it's both, for sure.
Yeah. I'm running out of questions. I'd ask you all this. You gave your prognosis on your tarot trends. Basically, I'm done with my questions, but do you have to say anything?
I guess I'm interested in asking you questions about what you see. And I mean, we talked a little bit about this, but I'm still so fascinated. What are your observations of European tradition, like what's going on in trends in Europe, that's including Britain, versus what you see as the American tarot traditions and cultural zeitgeist?
Yeah, well, what I think is happening in Europe is there are many associations now popping up, but nobody in Europe is really connected like I imagine the Americans are connected. I don't actually know whether people from California share a lot of stuff with people from New York or whatever. But definitely the Spanish tarot communities don't communicate much with the German tarot communities, and vice versa. There are also different traditions in Europe regarding tarot. We have this Tarot de Marseille tradition in the Latin speaking countries, in Spain and Portugal, in Italy. They're more using, of course, France as well, they're more using Tarot de Marseille, I would say, than we use it here in Germany. I don't know many Tarot de Marseille readers. Most of them use Waite. We don't actually have a German tarot tradition, interesting enough. We all have, we all used, since the Waite tarot came out, the Waite deck, or of course the Crawley deck. And I think it became popular in the 1980s in Germany. Well, at least I bought my first tarot deck in the 1980s, but I think then the books came out and decks came out, which was Crawley, Marseille, or the Waite deck. And I think people in Germany always used to do more skat. And of course, you know, skat is skat the English word? It's the poker cards. Is it, how do you call it?
The poker cards?
You know, the
Lenormand,
cards, which the cards without any pictures, just which you use for
just pip cards.
Yeah, pip cards, sorry. So there's a tradition of this in Germany, a strong tradition. There's one German tarot deck which is by Frank Glan. I don't know whether you know him. He was also an astrologer, and it's called the German Tarot deck, but it's the only German tarot deck I know. We have this tradition here in Germany, in the German-speaking countries, of this oracle cards, like Lenormand. I only found out a few years ago is actually a German tradition and not a French tradition. And
Kipper too, right? Isn't there a Kipper and
Kipper, right? And the Gypsy also, we called Gypsy deck. So we have this oracling tradition here more than tarot, and tarot is really something which came to us more via the British school. I think in Britain is the most of the tarot stuff happening in Europe, but then I don't know very much about the Eastern countries. I guess there's not, the scene is only developing now because during the times of the Cold War, psychic stuff was not very much appreciated in the east of Europe, but I'm not very sure about this. I don't know very much about it, actually. Perhaps there are people telling me something about this.
Well, there's one interesting thing. Wilhelm was a German missionary in China, and he is the most famous actual Western translation of the I Ching Book of Changes. And then when Wilhelm, I think the first one was in German, and then I think Young wrote a foreword. I believe it was Carl Jung who wrote a foreword to the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching and said, oh, this is very similar to the tarot. And he talked about the connections between the I Ching and the tarot in a foreword to the first Western translation of the I Ching, which came out of Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also, this is not German, but Austrian. We had Sigmund Freud, who was important, I guess, for all this development, using tools to tap into the unconscious. So there is a tradition from German-speaking thinking, which is important to the tarot development, but we actually didn't really do tarot in Germany until last century, so the 20th century, I have to say now.
Wow, interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I bet I should let you not ask questions.
No, I love it. This makes it fun for me. This is my compensation. This is really interesting to me.
Do you have any other questions?
No. Do other people have questions? Let's make sure we answer other people's questions.
We get this settled. There's a lot of focus recently on using playing cards and associate them with tarot meanings. What is your take on this? Kirsten and Benebell. Oh, I'm asked as well. Do you use playing cards in America for readings?
Yeah, so actually the first, my first understanding of quote unquote fortune telling or divination of any kind with cards, cartomancy, was actually with playing cards. I think high school children like to do that, for a fun thing. There's a lot of little fun things like Ouija boards that little kids should not be doing, but young children do anyway at slumber parties. So I remember as a teenager, girls would get together and use playing cards like in a fortune telling way to see which boy likes them in school or things like that. So it is a thing in terms of how I feel about using tarot meanings in a playing card tradition. I think that's one perspective. It's just one perspective. It's one person's approach to divination. I also believe this is a little bit more into the religious side. I think you can program a deck, using intention setting. There's a form of encoding, a form of sort of energy programming that can happen over a deck. So you can intentionally program a deck with specific meanings, and then it will work for you. So in that sense, within that closed universe, of course you can do that.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that the playing cards, as I said, I didn't mean pip cards, I meant
playing cards. Okay.
So the tradition of playing cards in Germany is quite well known. And the fusion of playing cards with oracle cards was also there, because we have the playing cards on the Lenormand cards, for example. And I'm not a Lenormand expert, so I can't say this, but obviously these meaning of these playing cards probably played into the development of the meanings for the Lenormand symbols, I would say. I didn't know that it's actually a trend to do this right now. So I can't say much on this, I have to say.
I didn't know it was a trend either, but if it is, I'm okay with it. Like, I don't have any opinion.
Yeah, perhaps it's happening on the cooler Insta sites than ours. But I know what you really want to be is cool. I read this also in your review about you. Yeah, I think we're already talking an hour now, and people are still there, which is very good. Oh, there's another question. Can Benebell recommend any source that discusses tarot and I Ching and how they may relate to one another. Yeah, that is a question. Do you have a book about this? Probably your own book, right?
Well, I think I've seen a lot of Western interpretations of that intersection. Crowley did one. I think Duquette did that. What was that one between those two? I can't remember. He collaborated with Rachel Pollack. I can't remember the name. It's got the gray borders.
Heindel?
You know, huh?
You mean
The Heindel tarot. And so there's been a lot, and there's a lot of other magicians and thought leaders in the West who have integrated tarot and I Ching. I don't know that I would recommend any of them as that, in the sense that I don't know any of them align with how I interpret it. I do my own tarot and I Ching intersectional work, but I don't have a book about that. So it's something that I do plan on writing a lot more about in depth in the future. But in terms of what I've seen, I don't see anything that I love. So I can't recommend any books. I find some really big issues with every single one of those perspectives.
I find it hard anyway to fuse these I Ching and tarot, for example, or the runes and tarot, even astrology and tarot I find sometimes difficult, or Kabbalah, because it's different stuff. It's interesting to do it, but it never perfectly fits, in my opinion. So it's best, I think, also to mix oneself what we want to mix. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I think, well, I have a theory that if it's truth, if there's some core truth to it, I do believe in a universal truth. You know, I believe there is some universal truth out there. And the way we talk about it through different cultural lenses and different religious and mythological lenses, it's your perspective as a human of that divine core truth. So if you can reduce to common denominator, if you can reduce all of the different, like Kabbalah and numerology and astrology and tarot and I Ching, if you can do a good job reducing it down to the common denominator, then you can reconcile these very different systems. But you have to boil away all of that human stuff to get to the core.
Yeah. It doesn't stop here. Wait. Just once more. Benebell, people are now wanting your book on I Ching and I Ching, you say, and tarot. So please, that's your next project, I would say. Or just make a YouTube video at least, please.
Sure, for sure.
And otherwise people are thanking us for this great discussions. I'm complimented on my glasses. Thank you.
I love your glasses too. They're really cool.
Yeah, I like them too. They make me look a bit mad, but it's not good for the lightning on YouTube, on Zoom. Whew. I think I'm talked out, Benebell. It was really great. You're just starting your day right now, right?
Correct.
Yeah, well, I'm just finishing it off, and it's so great that we can still talk to one another. I think this is something really great. The technical advancement we have, though there are many disadvantages, of course, but this brings people together. Still, meeting in person is always better than via the internet. And I really hope that at one point we can invite you to Germany. That's my plan, but I don't know how we will be able to do this. Let's see. Right now, nobody can meet up anybody anyway, so it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to leave houses in California either, like here in Germany?
It's complicated. I think it's more of a recommendation, but yeah, basically you're not allowed to leave the house unless you have something of pressing concern, but people do it anyway. We're not like, I noticed so for example, in Taiwan, China, the government can sort of issue a mandate and everybody follows it. They can stalk you on your phone using your phone's coordinates, and they like police you, and everyone's like, oh, okay, that's fine. You know, in America, we're like, can you please stay home? And everyone here is like, you know, like it's just this very like It's for your own good. We're not like, so it's really hard to get people to listen, but technically there's a shelter in place.
I think in Germany it's a mixture of the Chinese discipline and the American, I think, the gesture.
I'm more direct than you are.
That's okay. I'm just waiting for nasty comments if I do it. So, as I said, I have a Libra ascendant. You're Aquarian ascendant, right?
Aquarius ascendant,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, yeah, that figures. Well, anyway, let's do this another time again, and I will prepare more questions because I will be more prepared. And it was a great pleasure to talk to you. And you are as fantastic as I thought before you are. You're very creative, very bright, and you're so modest. I really like this about you. And please continue your brilliant work.
Wow, that was a lot to, well, thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed this too. So I'm glad we had a chance to actually meet in person in London, and I hope for more opportunities in the future to meet in person.
It will happen. So everybody who has more questions to ask, please, you can still comment. I will read everything and get back to Benebell if there's another question. And at another time, we're sure to meet again.
For sure.
For today, everybody who has to work now, good work. And everybody who wants to go to sleep now, good night. Have a great night or great day. And bye-bye.
Bye.